There comes a moment in every woman's life when her heart is ready to love, but God says, not this one. It's confusing, isn't it? You prayed for connection. You asked for partnership. You thought maybe this was the person who could see your worth, who could hold your heart without dropping it. But instead of a yes, God starts removing, exposing, unsettling. And while you're trying to figure out what went wrong, heaven is whispering, daughter, I'm protecting you from what you can't see. Sometimes divine protection feels like rejection, but baby, it's actually direction. You see, when God steps in to block a relationship, he's not punishing you, he's preserving you, because he knows that love outside of his timing can become a trap instead of a treasure. He knows the difference between a man who looks like destiny and one who's disguised as distraction. And while you're crying over what ended, God is covering you from what could have broken you. That delay you're fighting against might be the very thing that's keeping your heart from destruction. You may feel lonely, but heaven is busy strategically rearranging your path to align with the purpose that still needs you whole. So if it feels like everything is falling apart, if the text messages stop, the energy shifts, the doors close, and suddenly peace feels distant, don't rush to fill the silence. That silence is sacred. It's God saying you won't settle for less than what I've designed for you. Because when God is protecting a woman from the wrong man, he'll disturb your comfort to defend your calling. He'll close the door you wanted to walk through so you can walk into something that was built to last. This isn't rejection, it's redirection into your divine restoration. When God begins to protect you, it rarely comes wrapped in comfort. It often begins with disruption, confusion, and an ache you can't quite explain. You thought things were going smoothly, conversations were flowing, your heart was open, and then suddenly something shifts. The energy changes, the connection fades, or conflict rises out of nowhere. And while you're left questioning what happened, God is orchestrating protection. You see, divine protection rarely announces itself as protection. It often shows up disguised as disappointment. God has a way of interrupting what looks right so he can safeguard what is right. When he sees danger ahead, emotional, spiritual, or even physical, he doesn't ask for your permission to intervene. He loves you too much to let you walk blindfolded into heartbreak disguised as happiness. When a woman prays for God to lead her steps, she's also inviting him to interrupt her plans. You can't ask for divine direction and resist divine disruption. God's protection often looks like unanswered prayers, ghosted messages, delayed proposals, or sudden endings that make no sense in the moment. But while you're crying over what feels like loss, God is smiling over what he just rescued you from. He's the kind of father who will pull you out of a burning building even if you're mad at him for ruining your favorite dress. Because he sees what you don't. He knows that man's hidden motives, unspoken fears, unresolved wounds, and unseen potential to wound you. He knows that what looks good now might cost your peace later. And he would rather disappoint you for a season than let you destroy yourself for a lifetime. The truth is, many of us confuse disruption with punishment. We think if something ends suddenly, it means we did something wrong. But sometimes God's disruption is the evidence that you've done something right. It's proof that your prayers for discernment are working, that your growth is manifesting, and that your spirit has elevated beyond what that connection can sustain. God will not let you shrink to fit into something that can't hold the new version of you. That's why things you used to tolerate suddenly irritate your soul. That's why conversations that once excited you now feel shallow. It's not that you become too much, it's that you become too aware. And awareness births boundaries. God's disruption is his way of saying you're growing too fast to settle for this level. You may not realize it at first, but protection always costs comfort. Every divine separation requires you to release something familiar. And for women, especially those with nurturing hearts, that's not easy. We love to fix, to heal, to help, to hope. But God's protection demands surrender. It calls you to trust his no even when your heart is still screaming yes. Sometimes the man God removes isn't evil. He's just not equipped for you. He may have a good heart, but not the strength to handle your purpose. He may be kind, but not consistent, loving, but not led. And when God knows that your future requires a partner who can handle the weight of your destiny, he will disrupt any bond that threatens it, not because he's cruel, but because he's strategic. He's thinking generationally while you're thinking emotionally. That's why divine protection feels personal. It touches the most vulnerable parts of you. It forces you to confront your attachment to people, validation, and the idea of control. You may find yourself asking, why did God let me meet him in the first place if he knew it wouldn't last? But maybe that connection wasn't about the relationship. It was about revelation. Maybe God allowed it to expose your patterns, your worth, your wounds, your need to heal. Maybe it was never meant to end in marriage, but in maturity. Disruption often delivers clarity. It exposes what your emotions tried to excuse. It shows you how much of yourself you give away without discernment and how much you need to return to the one who truly sees you. When you start seeing disruption through divine lenses, peace replaces panic. You begin to realize that losing something you prayed for doesn't mean you lost God's favor. It means his favor was active all along. It was working behind the scenes, redirecting your steps, blocking what was beneath your calling, and preserving your emotional energy for something better. God's protection often comes with silence because he doesn't owe explanations. He offers revelation in his timing. The question is, can you stay still long enough to let him show you why he had to move the way he did? Because every time he removes someone, he's making room for something sacred. Every heartbreak becomes holy ground when you see it through the lens of heaven's strategy. You may find yourself revisiting the memories, replaying the conversations, wondering if you overreacted or misunderstood. That's part of the healing, but understand this: God will never take something from you without the intention to replace it with something that aligns with your purpose. What he removes was never meant to sustain your future. You were trying to build permanence in a place he only meant to be temporary. That's why it kept crumbling no matter how much effort you gave. It wasn't a lack of love, it was a lack of divine authorization. And when heaven revokes access, no amount of emotional effort can reopen the door. It's not rejection, it's redirection. Divine disruption also reveals your dependence. Sometimes God disrupts relationships to show you how much you've made people your peace instead of him. You start realizing that your sense of worth was tied to attention, that your joy was dependent on communication, that your value was measured by someone's affection. And when that's gone, it hurts, but it also heals. Because God's protection isn't just about saving you from them. It's about restoring you to yourself. It's about breaking the cycle of emotional codependency that keeps you from walking boldly in your calling. The disruption becomes the detox. It cleanses your spirit from attachments that cloud your discernment and steals your strength. If you pay attention, divine protection leaves evidence. It may come as a strange peace in the middle of chaos. It may show up as confirmation after you release what you've been holding on to. It may manifest through opportunities that never would have come had you stayed where you were. God's hand moves subtly, but when you reflect, you'll see that every closed door was a mercy, every delay was a lesson, and every detour was a rescue mission. Protection rarely feels good when it's happening, but it always looks good in hindsight, because when you finally see what God was shielding you from, you'll thank him for every tear that felt wasted and every ending that felt unfair. So when your plans fall apart, when that man pulls away, when everything that once felt promising starts unraveling, pause before you panic. Ask yourself, could this be protection in disguise? Because the same God who opens doors is the same God who closes them when danger is ahead. And just because you don't understand it now doesn't mean it's not working for your good. He's not just protecting your heart, he's protecting your destiny, your peace, your purpose, your legacy. He's not letting you lose something. You're being loosened from something that could have cost you everything. That's what divine disruption does. It shakes what's not stable so that what's meant for you can finally stand. Discernment is one of the most powerful gifts a woman can carry, yet it's also one of the most underestimated. In a world where charm can imitate character and consistency can be mistaken for love, discernment becomes the light that cuts through deception. When God begins to protect a woman from the wrong man, he activates her discernment not to scare her, but to show her. He starts pulling back the curtain on words that don't match actions, on promises that feel heavy instead of holy. You'll start feeling a quiet unease in your spirit even when everything looks perfect on the surface. That unease is an anxiety. It's revelation. It's the Holy Spirit whispering, pay attention. Because what your eyes see might be appealing, but what your spirit senses knows the truth. Discernment isn't about judgment. It's about recognition. It's the inner knowing that alerts you before the storm hits. It's that pause before you reply to the text, that tug in your heart that says something isn't right. You may not have evidence, but you have an impression. And that's where divine protection begins. God speaks through impressions when he knows evidence would confuse you. Because if he showed you everything all at once, you might try to fix it instead of flee from it. So instead, he gives you glimpses, small hints, changes in tone, a shift in consistency, an odd feeling you can't shake. Discernment is like spiritual radar. It detects danger before it becomes visible. And the closer you walk with God, the sharper that radar becomes. Many women silence their discernment because they don't want to appear paranoid or fearful. They convince themselves they're overthinking, that maybe they're just scared of being hurt again. But there's a difference between fear and foresight. Fear reacts to trauma, but discernment responds to truth. When God places discernment inside you, he's giving you early warning signs that something is off. It's like a smoke detector in your spirit. It doesn't explain the fire, but it warns you before you get burned. That's why you can't ignore those subtle red flags, those quiet nudges, those moments when peace disappears and confusion takes its place. Peace leaves when protection starts to move. When God withdraws his peace, he's revealing his position, and that's your cue to move with him. Sometimes discernment doesn't come through your own awareness, it comes through people around you. God will use your mother, your sister, your friend, even a stranger to say something that pierces through your emotions, and you'll feel conflicted because your heart wants to believe in potential, but your spirit is warning you about patterns. Discernment forces you to choose between what you want and what's wise. It teaches you to listen beyond emotions, to pay attention to fruit instead of fantasy. Because the enemy can imitate many things: appearance, charm, even language that sounds spiritual, but he can't produce fruit that lasts. Discernment helps you identify that difference. It allows you to see whether this man adds to your peace or drains it, whether he pushes you toward God or pulls you from him. Love without alignment is chaos dressed in chemistry. God uses discernment not to shame you, but to sharpen you. Every time you ignore it and end up hurt, he's not angry. He's teaching, he's showing you how to trust that still small voice within you. Because discernment is not always loud, sometimes it's subtle. It's the discomfort in conversations that used to feel comfortable. It's the way your joy feels muted even when everything seems right. It's that moment when you realize your prayers have become about fixing someone instead of following God. That's discernment reminding you that you can't be the savior in someone's story when God has not assigned you to be. You can love someone and still let them go when you realize they're not aligned with your calling. Discernment liberates you from emotional captivity. A woman walking in discernment carries a certain kind of strength. She doesn't need closure to move on. She doesn't need validation to know her worth. She trusts that what doesn't bring peace doesn't belong. That doesn't mean she's cold or detached. It means she's wise. She understands that discernment isn't about suspicion. It's about spiritual protection. It's the ability to recognize when the Holy Spirit says, this is not it. And sometimes it's not even about the man. It's about your own healing. Discernment helps you see whether your attraction is coming from wholeness or from a wound. Because sometimes what feels like connection is actually comfort to your brokenness. Discernment reveals the difference between healing energy and familiar pain. It shows you whether you're being drawn by destiny or by dysfunction. When you start honoring your discernment, you stop negotiating your boundaries, you stop explaining your intuition, you stop apologizing for walking away, because once you've experienced peace, confusion becomes intolerable. You begin to realize that discernment isn't about predicting the future, it's about protecting your present. It helps you recognize counterfeit love before it drains your strength. It helps you pause long enough to ask, is this man complementing my purpose or competing with it? When you discern that someone's presence is costing you your peace, your joy, your focus, that's not love, it's distraction. And distraction is the enemy of destiny. The enemy doesn't always come to destroy, sometimes he comes to detour. That's why discernment is so vital. It keeps you on the path of divine alignment. Discernment is a sacred intimacy between you and God. It's not something you can learn through logic alone. It's developed through relationship. The more time you spend in prayer, the more sensitive your spirit becomes to God's whispers. The more you study his word, the easier it becomes to spot what doesn't match his character. A woman who prays for discernment doesn't just want to be loved. She wants to be led. She doesn't just want attention, she wants alignment. She doesn't just want chemistry, she wants confirmation. That's what separates her from the world. She's not impressed by potential, she's moved by purpose. When discernment is active, you stop chasing validation and start following peace. And peace never hides in confusion. There are times when your discernment will tell you something before your heart is ready to accept it. You'll want to believe the best, give one more chance, hold on a little longer. But discernment requires obedience, not negotiation. When God shows you something, believe him the first time. Every time you ignore discernment, the lesson gets louder. Every time you obey it, the blessing gets close. God will never allow you to lose something through obedience that was meant to stay. He's not trying to deprive you. He's developing you. He's training your spirit to recognize the difference between temporary satisfaction and eternal security. That's why discernment is uncomfortable. It requires you to choose faith over feelings. A woman who learns to trust her discernment becomes dangerous to the enemy. Because now she's not moved by flattery, she's moved by fruit. She doesn't fall for potential, she waits for peace. She doesn't chase attention, she guards her anointing. Discernment gives her vision that sees beyond charm, beyond performance, beyond promises. It allows her to identify when something is sent to distract her or to develop her. And when you live from that place of spiritual awareness, you don't just avoid heartbreak, you protect your destiny. You start walking in confidence, knowing that every no is sacred, every not yet is intentional, and every red flag is a message from heaven saying, I've got better waiting for you. God's protection often begins as a whisper in your spirit, not a storm in your life. And discernment is how you hear that whisper. It's how you recognize that sometimes the peace you feel when you let go is louder than the love you thought you had when you held on. When you start listening to that peace, when you start honoring that quiet voice within you, you align yourself with divine strategy. Because discernment doesn't just keep you from the wrong people, it positions you for the right promises. It teaches you to stop chasing clarity from man when God has already spoken through conviction. And the moment you decide to trust what you sense more than what you see, you'll begin to understand that discernment isn't about fear, it's about freedom. What God blocks is never punishment, it's preparation. When a door closes, when a connection fades, when a relationship falls apart that you thought was forever, it's not because God forgot you. It's because he's building something you can't yet see. Every blocked opportunity, every denied relationship, every unanswered prayer carries divine intention. God is not withholding love from you. He's preparing a love that can handle you. He's not ignoring your desire. He's refining it. What you call rejection is often the construction zone of your destiny. And while you're crying over what didn't happen, heaven is setting up what's about to happen. You think it's over, but God is saying, I'm just getting started. When God blocks something, he's not just removing a person, he's protecting a purpose, because there are certain people who cannot go where you're going, not because they're evil, but because they're not equipped to sustain your assignment. Their presence would weigh down your progress. Their mindset would interfere with your movement. So when God blocks them, it's not about them. It's about the version of you he's developing. The woman he's forming in you needs space to grow without distraction. And sometimes that means being stripped of everything that doesn't align with your future. You can't receive what God is building while clinging to what he's blocking. Letting go becomes an act of faith, not failure. There's a kind of blessing that can only be built in isolation, a kind of strength that only emerges after heartbreak. When God blocks something, he's teaching you to trust him beyond your emotions. You may not understand the why, but you're invited to believe that there is one. You prayed for a man who would love you like Christ loves the church, but you didn't know that kind of love requires patience, purification, and preparation. God is answering your prayer in the form of delay because he's working on both of you. Maybe he's healing your heart while he's maturing his. Maybe he's teaching you boundaries while he's teaching him integrity. What you call waiting, heaven calls building. And if you could see what he's constructing behind the scenes, you'd stop mourning what was never meant to last. The blocking of one door is the blessing of another, but that transition space, the in-between, is the hardest part. That's where faith feels fragile and silence feels heavy. You start wondering if you did something wrong, if maybe you misheard God, if you're being too picky or too spiritual. But what if God's no is the evidence that you're growing? What if the reason it doesn't fit anymore is because you've outgrown that season? Sometimes God doesn't just block people, he blocks access to old versions of you, the version of you that tolerated inconsistency. The version that accepted crumbs and called it connection. The version that confused being needed with being loved. When God blocks something, he's calling you to evolve. He's saying you can't go back there. I've upgraded your worth. We often think God's blessings come wrapped in yeses, but sometimes they come wrapped in no's that feel like heartbreak. Those no's are sacred. They protect you from counterfeit covenants, because not everyone who wants you is assigned to you. Not every connection is covenantal. Some people are just seasonal, sent to teach you, not to keep you. And if you try to extend what God intended to expire, it becomes bondage. God blocks certain things because he refuses to let you turn temporary lessons into permanent prisons. He's too intentional with your destiny to let you settle in dysfunction. That's why some relationships don't end peacefully, they end painfully. Because God had to make it uncomfortable enough for you to release what you refuse to walk away from. What God is building requires your availability. He can't fill hands that are already full of what he asked you to let go of. That's why the block had to happen. He's clearing your emotional space, detoxing your heart from distractions, resetting your vision so you can recognize what real love feels like. The love he's preparing for you won't confuse you, won't compete with your purpose, won't drain your spirit. But before he sends that, he builds you into the kind of woman who won't sabotage it. The block isn't just about the man, it's about your maturity. God is teaching you that love isn't proven through persistence, it's revealed through peace. The one he's preparing you for will bring calm to your chaos, not add to it. But first, he's building you to recognize the difference. In the building season, you learn to trust God's timing over your timeline. You learn that his delays are not denials. They're divine development. When God blocks something, it's usually because the foundation isn't stable enough to carry the weight of your destiny. He doesn't want you to build your life on temporary emotions. He wants you to value alignment more than attraction, purpose more than presence, faith more than fantasy. So he blocks anything that would compromise that. You may feel lonely in the process, but you're not alone. You're being refined. God isolates what he intends to elevate. He removes distractions before promotion. He prunes before he produces. Every block is a sign that construction is happening in the unseen. One of the hardest parts of being built by God is watching others receive what you've been praying for while you're still waiting. You'll see engagement photos, wedding announcements, happy couples, and wonder if God skipped over you. But he didn't skip you. He's saving you. Because what he's building for you requires a foundation that won't collapse under pressure. You're not behind, you're being customized. Your love story won't look like everyone else's because your purpose isn't like everyone else's. The man God has for you will not only love you, but align with the call on your life. And that kind of union can't be rushed. It has to be refined. So while you see a block, heaven sees a blueprint. While you see delay, God sees destiny under construction. The block also teaches you to stop idolizing outcomes. Sometimes God has to block something to reveal where your trust really lies. Were you trusting him or the idea of being chosen? Were you praying for his will or your comfort? The block reveals motives. It shows you whether you've surrendered your desires or simply spiritualized them. Because true surrender doesn't fight God's no, it flows with it. It says, Lord, if it's not him, I still trust you. If it's not now, I still believe you. If it's not how I pictured it, I still praise you. That's when you shift from pain to power. That's when the block becomes a blessing, because now you understand that God's rejection always carries redirection. Every time he says no, he's pointing you toward a better yes. Eventually, when the right season arrives, you'll look back and thank God for every block. You'll realize that what you thought was a setback was actually set up. That every time you thought something was falling apart, it was actually falling into place. The doors that closed weren't barriers, they were boundaries keeping your destiny safe. And the peace that follows a divine block is unlike anything you've ever felt. It's the kind of peace that says, I may not have what I wanted, but I trust what he's doing. That's when you know you graduated from frustration to faith, because you finally understand that what God blocks is never a loss. It's a lesson wrapped in love. So when something doesn't work out, when a relationship ends, when you feel forgotten or left behind, remember that the block isn't rejection, it's construction. God is building a version of you that's too powerful to settle, too focused to be distracted, too anointed to be deceived. Every no is carving character. Every delay is deepening dependence. Every ending is expanding endurance. What God blocks today becomes the foundation for what he builds tomorrow. And when it's time, what he's been preparing for you will fit so perfectly that you'll understand why every other door had to stay closed.